Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, bon après-midi, bon matin. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. Bonjour à tout le monde. My name is Dallas Alderson and I work for the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada. Today's webinar, Canadiens want stability and cooperatives deliver it. Je m'appelle Dallas Alderson et je travaille pour la Fédération de l'habitation coopérative du Canada. Je vais faire une brève déclaration sur le territoire et aborder quelques points pratiques avant de céder la parole aux conférenciers. Pour le webinaire aujourd'hui, les Canadiens veulent de la stabilité et les coopératives y répondent. I'll be doing a brief land acknowledgement and noting some housekeeping items before I turn it over to today's speakers. So welcome to everyone. We have participants from all across Canada joining us today, which is wonderful. I would ask that each of you take a moment to reflect on and acknowledge the land on which you are located, and I will do the same aloud from where I reside, which is the unceded, traditional, and really quite beautiful territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. I offer my deep gratitude and respect to the Anishinaabe Algonquin people as the guardians of this land. Parce que on a des participants de partout du Canada avec nous aujourd'hui, je vous invite à prendre un moment pour réfléchir et reconnaître le territoire sur lequel vous vous trouvez. Je ferai de même à voix haute depuis l'endroit où je réside. Il s'agit ici du territoire traditionnel non cédé de la nation algonquine Anishinaabe et j'exprime ma profonde gratitude et mon respect au peuple Anishinaabe algonquin, gardien traditionnel de ce territoire. Now, a few housekeeping notes. Given today's large numbers of participants, everyone is on mute and can't be unmuted. If you have any technical questions or difficulties throughout the webinar and for the question period at the end of today's session, please use the chat function. As I think you will have realized, this is a bilingual webinar. We'll have speakers in English and French, but you can choose if you want to see the English or French slide presentation, and we will have text-based simultaneous translation, which can be made audible. I'll just provide some brief instructions for both, first in English and then in French. Parce qu'on a un grand nombre de participants aujourd'hui, les micros sont sont coupés pour tout le monde et ne peuvent pas être réactivés. Pour toute question ou encore de difficultés techniques, et surtout pour la séance de questions-réponses à la fin, veuillez utiliser la fonction de chat. Aujourd'hui, c'est un webinaire bilingue. Les intervenants s'exprimeront en français et en anglais. La présentation disponible dans les deux langues. Tu pourras choisir. Ainsi, on a la traduction simultanée textuelle qui peut être lue à voix haute aussi. Et maintenant pour les instructions. So for the presentation slide, you can choose the presentation screen you wish in English or French. You just need to hover at the top of your screen and you should see a tab that says either English or Français. And that way you'll be able to see the presentation screen in the language of your choice. For accessing simultaneous interpretation, we're using a service called Wordly. So you'll see the link in the chat to Wordly. You need to click on it, and that text-based interpretation will start in the language of your choosing in an adjoining screen. You can also have it read out loud just by clicking on the audio icon once you get to the Wordly screen. Donc, vous pouvez choisir l'écran que vous voulez, en anglais ou en français. Tu vas voir en haut les options français ou English. Tu peux cliquer celui que tu préfères. Vous pouvez également accéder à Wordly. C'est un service d'interprétation simultanée textuelle. On a un lien pour Wordly dans le chat. Cliquez dessous pour lancer l'interprétation dans la langue que tu préfères et ça va apparaître sur l'écran adjacent. Vous pouvez aussi accéder à l'audio directement avec Wordly en cliquant sur l'icône avec un petit audio. Si jamais vous avez des défis, s'il te plaît, laissez-nous savoir. On va essayer de vous aider dans le chat. If you're having any problems with this, reach out in the chat and we will try to help you out. Now, hopefully everybody is set up with interpretation. So just very briefly, so I can quickly turn it over to today's speakers, I'll just outline our broad format. Today, our webinar will consist of a 35 to 40-minute presentation, after which we'll have 15 to 20 minutes for questions. And as I mentioned earlier, given our large numbers, questions will only be taken in the chat. We'll do our best to get to everyone's questions, but there are email addresses that will be provided at the end. If there's something you want to have answered, you can reach out by email. We'll also have the recording available and we'll send it out afterwards. So hopefully that helps as well. Maintenant, I think we can change to the next slide. I'm super pleased to introduce today's speakers. We have Oksana Krishak, who is the Vice President of Insights with Abacus Data. We have Tim Ross, CEO of the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada. And we have Mike Toy, Executive Director of Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada. And now I'm very pleased to turn it over to Mike and Tim to kick us off.
Merci, Dallas. There we go. Hopefully that works now. Merci, Dallas. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Merci d'être là en si grand nombre. Il y a 2 mois, à Davos, le premier ministre Carney a parlé d'une rupture dans l'ordre mondial. Mais c'est juste le plus récent vague de changements qui déferle sur les Canadiens. Les technologies, la pandémie, les sinistres liés au changement climatique, le coût de la vie qui monte, particulièrement du logement, surtout pour les jeunes, une ère de mésinformation et désinformation, enfin les guerres militaires et commerciales, ça ne s'arrête pas. Les temps sont durs, mais les coopératives, mutuelles, caisses et credit unions ont toujours brillé dans ces moments, les moments les plus difficiles, ont été créés pour ça. Quand j'ai commencé à Coopérative et Mutuelle Canada il y a un peu plus d'1 an, un point de repère important pour moi était l'étude faite par Abacus en 2019 sur l'opinion publique au sujet des coopératives. À l'époque, cette étude nous révélait qu'un Canadien sur 3 était déjà membre d'une coopérative, une caisse, un credit union ou une mutuelle, et 57% des Canadiens de la population totale se sentent un attachement profond aux valeurs coopératives. C'est des chiffres d'appui très forts pour nous, mais ça datait déjà c'était un certain temps. Et le monde avant la pandémie, ça a changé un petit peu. Alors, il fallait qu'on vérifie de nouveau certains résultats et explorer davantage le rôle potentiel des coops dans la situation actuelle. Vous avez peut-être vu que le manque de reconnaissance ou le besoin de sensibilisation est l'enjeu le plus important pour le 8e année consécutive, selon l'étude faite annuellement par le Centre canadien pour l'étude des coopératives à l'Université de Saskatchewan. Et pour s'attaquer à cet enjeu, il faut commencer par comprendre qu'est-ce que c'est que les Canadiens pensent des coops, qu'est-ce qu'ils veulent dans leur vie et comment on peut répondre à leurs besoins et attentes. Alors aujourd'hui, on va voir qu'est-ce qui a changé depuis 2019, qu'est-ce qui est pareil, qu'est-ce que ça veut dire pour nous et comment on peut utiliser ces données pour saisir le moment présent afin de construire une économie plus coopérative. Alors, je passe la parole à Tim.
Ben, merci, Michael. Thank you very much for the opportunity to join you today. It's great to be with you and to know that so many cooperators and folks who are curious about the cooperative movement have joined us here today. I know time is very precious, and even just that reflection that Michael offered just moments ago, what has changed since 2019? Well, I think some of the data that we'll hear soon will help us reflect on that, but certainly plenty has changed since 2019. As Mike said, this data is timely. It's clearly allowing us to see how the context change between 2019 and today is reflected in how people see cooperatives and how cooperatives can see people in helping to address everyday needs and opportunities of communities across the country. For my part, I'm coming at this specifically from a cooperative housing lens, and I can tell you that the prolonged instability that comes through the data has certainly been seen in a housing context. We have a housing crisis in Canada that has only deepened over the last decade. There has been so much housing insecurity for Canadians, and we hear all the time from our member co-ops who have inquiries near constantly, on a constant basis, about vacancies from individuals and families who are increasingly desperate for housing. At the same time, we've seen more recently an increasing interest in the co-op model, particularly the co-op housing model. In housing crisis, people are looking for solutions for demonstrated successes that don't put heavy burdens or risks on people and deliver a proven response to the needs of communities. So I'm eager to dig in on the data and engage in the discussion today, and I'm now pleased to turn it over to Oksana, who will walk us through the data and the story. We can go to the next slide and invite Oksana to proceed.
Thank
We're
you.
just
Sorry, I'm having trouble with the
perfect.
mute button there, but I am back online. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me as part of the group today. I'm honored to be the one who gets to share so many of these exciting data points and really be able to tie the conversation to data along with Mike and Tim, who can really bring that cooperative perspective. If we can just go to the next slide, I'll start by just sharing a little bit about sort of why we're here today and a little bit of the outline of the research and just sort of set us all up so that we're all on the same page here. I like to say that the methodology slide is either your most favorite slide in a presentation or your least favorite slide. So for those of you data nerds like myself out there, on the left of the screen is really the stats you're looking for about who we were talking to. We had a really large sample with this study, thanks both to Mike and Tim's organization, who really wanted to dig into the data and really get at sort of the root of a lot of these pieces and be able to identify trends and then look at different subgroups. The research was fielded last November in 2025, and of course, we were making sure we were seeking out a representative sample and then weighting the data by age, gender, education, and region. For those of us who maybe don't care so much about that and are more about interested in the why, this study is one of my favorites that we've done at Abacus in a really long time. And part of that is because of just both how broad and how open these organizations are in doing research, but also our ability to benchmark from some research done in 2019 that was just as extensive. We went into field in November 2019 with a very similar survey. Little did we know that a week after sharing the data publicly, the world as we knew it would change drastically. And I think on one hand, that allowed us to collect some really interesting pieces of measurement to really understand where the Canadian mindset is with co-ops, but also generally and where the cooperative movement really fits into what Canadians need and what they're looking for, which I think is so important to be considering in this sector today. So the research does revisit a lot of similar questions from 2019, but as you may expect, as we all live through it, a profoundly different context from where we are or were today. Despite all that's changed, and I'll get into a little bit more about the mindset of where Canadians are at now versus then, it's remarkable to see that public confidence in cooperatives has held, and there is such a strong interest in the cooperative movement today, not only just baseline, but Canadians really identifying the cooperative movement as a core solution to some of their sort of biggest questions today about what they're seeking out in their lives generally, or whether it be through housing or another sort of aspect of their lives. A lot of the questions, as I mentioned, were benchmarked from 2019, and there were three core diagnostic objectives that we were looking at. The first was sense of control and stability. This is something that we wanted to measure in 2019 and has become all the more relevant in 2025, 2026. The next piece is trust in institutions. That too has seen a bit of a roller coaster over the last 5 years. But I think what the key takeaway is for this audience in this group is that the opportunities for cooperatives within that space are immense right now. And finally, we wanted to understand the perceptions of cooperatives, including housing cooperatives in this new context, in this new day and age. And so the biggest sort of takeaway from all of this that I hope that we'll be able to share with you today is that the story isn't about cooperatives alone, but it's about what Canadians are looking for and just how well the cooperative movement fits into that search that they're doing. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll just briefly kind of take us through where we came from, and then we'll get into some of the three sort of key core takeaways from this research that we found. Just a reminder, maybe some of you don't want to walk down memory lane, but we're going to do it anyways because I think it really sets the context for where we're at. Just a reminder of where we've come from since the last research was conducted 6 years ago. In April of 2020, obviously the pandemic changed our lives as we know it, and Canadians were living through cycles of fear and relief. We were watching case numbers grow and drop, if we were allowed to go outside or not, if the grocery store had different lineup, aisle protocol, all those sorts of things. It was a very up and down period in Canadians' lives. Then we entered a period of shortages and scarcity where things were scarce. Toilet paper wasn't on the shelves. There was a real lack of housing supply. There were larger numbers of folks immigrating to Canada, which caused more feelings of scarcity and shortage among Canadians. But we're not necessarily at either of these places anymore. We've sort of entered this new era, if you will, in the last year or two, with the election of Donald Trump to his second term down south. What this has sort of triggered is what we're calling a precarity mindset, where life looks a lot different for Canadians than it did back in 2019, but also looks a lot different than it did in 2021 or even 2024. As you'll see, there's lots of the same conversations happening, but the frame of reference that Canadians are using is a lot different today than it has been in the past. So as an example of how this transition has sort of happened, every 2 weeks or more, we're in the field asking Canadians what's keeping them up at night. And if you'll go to the next slide, there's sort of two word clouds that we've collected. I apologize, a lot of the words are in English just based on the sample size, but there's some French scattered in there. But the main takeaway here is just looking at those big words. In July of 2024, when we asked this question, a couple of themes rose to the top, but they were all sort of similar context. Inflation, cost of living, housing specifically, really on the minds of Canadians. Now, when we look at the word cloud, there is a far bigger and much different word that didn't appear in 2024, which is war, Iran, Trump, all of these sorts of pieces. Now, for those who are sort of in the comms lens and part of this conversation, this isn't to say that you need to be speaking about global conflict to be relevant. The takeaway here is really to understand what is on Canadians' minds, and that's precarity. I'd like to say I work in the world of perception and not reality, but as I sort of continue in my career, I think maybe a more accurate statement is I work in the world of the general public's reality. And that's really what I want you to take away from this slide today is really the reality of what Canadians are living in, what they are thinking about, and what is shaping their view of really everything else in their life if they're going to bed and this is what's on their mind. When the majority of Canadians are preoccupied with these sorts of things, this shapes their decisions that they make. For example, when to fill up on gas if prices are going up and down like they are here in Ontario, but also shapes their mood and frame of reference. Whereas if they're feeling the world is very precarious, what does that mean for the type of housing that they're going to be looking after, including cost of living as a tumultuous sort of addition to that? But what does it mean for their mindset? And so what does a precarity mindset look like from some of our other research? There's three sort of key pieces that I want to leave you with. If you can move on to the next slide. The first piece is that precarity is persistent. 89% of Canadians, which is a near majority, believe instability is permanent. This is a situation that's been going on for so long where Canadians have not felt any sort of relief that they're beginning to think that this way of living is becoming the norm. It's also generational. 67% of Canadians believe the cost of living is as bad as it's ever been. So what does that say about when folks are making decisions about the price of items or finding sort of a housing situation that works for their needs when the cost of living is as high as they think they can ever imagine it being? Finally, precarity is destabilizing. 54% of Canadians are less confident about their future now than they were 3 years ago. And so when folks don't feel that they have a stable path forward or the decisions that they make today might not hold in the future, that really shapes who they're looking for to sort of bring along and be part of their community. When Canadians are feeling they're living in unstable waters, their priorities begin to shift. And we look at this through, if you can move to the next slide, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Some of you who've taken a sort of intro psychology class might be familiar with this pyramid. This was another question that we asked in our other research, but I'll come back to it later. I think it's extremely relevant. We asked Canadians from a list of 5 different things, what are you focused on right now? And if you take a look at the numbers on the right side of the screen, over half of Canadians are focused on those bottom two rungs. That's what they're trying to fulfill. They're not trying to necessarily be making decisions to have status or recognition or freedom or even love and belonging. A lot of Canadians are looking to meet their basic needs. And so that's where we find sort of the state of Canadians today and sort of the environment in which they were both responding to this survey and also going to be looking at cooperatives to sort of bring solutions and be part of their community to help bring some stability and meet some of these needs that they're looking for. So if we move on to the next slide, the first key finding from this piece of work is that cooperatives put people back in control, and that this is something that many Canadians feel that they have lost. If we go to the next slide again, we asked a question in 2019 that is, I think, extremely relevant back then and is today, where we asked Canadians to rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 5. What kind of control do you think you have in your life? 1 being they don't have any control, others have control over their lives, and 5 being they feel they're in complete control of their lives. Most important on this slide is looking at that middle bar right there. The 38% in 2019 drops to 19% in 2025. And so what this is really showing us is that Canadians have become much more polarized in their sense of control, and that middle group has dropped 19 points. Nearly half of Canadians say life feels more unpredictable than it used to, and things like housing and cost of living and institutional distance are all driving this loss of agency. It's important to note that this isn't necessarily an abstract feeling either, but it's really linked in lived experiences with cost of living. Many Canadians feel priced out. They feel decisions are being made elsewhere. But I think that's also where we start to see glimmers of the cooperative movement come in and be able to really structurally tackle this piece. One final sort of key finding on this before we'll jump to sort of the cooperative perspective on this is that the last 5 years have really leveled the playing field of instability. When we look at sort of this swoop of feeling of control among demographics, what it's actually done is really sort of leveled the playing field in those who feel unstable. If you're high income, you feel as unstable as you are if you're a low income individual. Feeling unstable looks very similar for older and younger Canadians. But what's different is that how that instability actually impacts folks' lives. As you can imagine, If someone is from a higher income or sort of higher class bracket, that instability might look a lot different than it does for someone who's struggling to pay rent or maybe is not able to secure housing. But the important takeaway here is that this sort of phenomenon that we're seeing is affecting everybody. And so no matter who you're communicating to about your cooperative and the cooperative movement, this is the mindset that a lot of Canadians are approaching the conversation with. So if we move to the next sort of piece, maybe I'll let Mike jump in and add some commentary here about the cooperative role. If we can move to the next slide.
Oui, merci, Oksana. Ce qui m'a frappé, si on revient pour un instant à la hiérarchie de Maslow, c'est qu'il y a 20% qui priorisent les réalisations de soi, mais c'est 65% des gens qui sont préoccupés encore par leurs besoins de base. J'ai vu dans le chat, oui, ces pressions sur l'abordabilité, le coût de la vie n'ont pas diminué. On est distrait peut-être par la guerre, mais la question de logement, alimentation, sécurité personnelle, emploi et santé, 65 personnes, c'est énorme, ou 65% de la population, plutôt c'est énorme. Et je ne l'ai pas validé ceci avec Oksana, mais probablement parmi eux, il y a le 30% de la population qui ressent le moins de contrôle sur leur vie. C'est probablement eux autres qu'on trouve là-dedans aussi. Là, alors là, il ne s'agit pas d'une anxiété abstraite, une réalité, c'est une réalité vécue à tous les jours. Les gens ont le sentiment d'être exclus par les prix et les décisions qui sont prises ailleurs. Et évidemment, les coopératives remédient ce phénomène de manière structurelle. On est une propriété partagée, une gouvernance démocratique, une responsabilité locale, une réponse surtout aux besoins pratiques, tout en améliorant la communauté. Ce que je pense que l'aspect recherché par les gens qui recherchent la réalisation de soi, ils veulent aussi cette amélioration des impacts dans la communauté. Et on sait que lorsque les gens se sentent impuissants, la confiance s'effrite, mais les coopératives redonnent aux gens pas seulement des services essentiels, pas seulement une réponse à leurs besoins, mais le pouvoir d'agir, hein, un peu plus de contrôle dans leur vie. Huron Douglas, qui est le directeur général de l'Alliance coopérative internationale, il est venu parler à notre congrès à Regina au mois de juin passé, puis il a parlé à l'échelle planétaire une crise de multilatéralisme. C'est du fait que ces institutions ne fonctionnent plus. C'est une réalité, en réalité, je crois que c'est un défi de gouvernance. Au Canada, le pays est fondé sur des idées de paix, d'ordre et de bon gouvernement, mais je pense qu'il est temps de repenser le bon gouvernement et reconnaître à la place la bonne gouvernance. Et c'est ça qu'on fait. On offre une façon de se gouverner à une échelle tangible et directe pour les gens et selon des valeurs et principes que les Canadiens veulent promouvoir. On offre un modèle d'action collective qui marche et qui est digne de confiance. Alors, je pense que le contexte est très propice pour nous, mais je te laisse continuer, Oksana.
Thanks, Mike. Let's jump to the next key finding here, which is that Canadians want stability and not disruption. Perhaps unsurprising given just how precarious I outlaid what Canadians are feeling right now. But there's this real anchoring to stability that I think is very widespread and far-reaching, and an opportunity to sort of take ownership of and sort of share the cooperative model. So if we move to the next slide, there's a couple key pieces of how I think precarity is really shaping the conversation with sort of cooperatives specifically. The first is that precarity means it's hard to find one's footing. We asked, in Canada today, many essentials like jobs, healthcare access, and housing feel harder to secure than they used to. 90% of Canadians agree with this statement. Again, it's a very sort of overreaching, broad sort of feeling of what Canadians are experiencing today. For Canadians with this, we can say that stability is now defined as things like secure homes, it's defined as strong communities, it's defined as shared decision making. If we look a little bit further to the next slide, precarity also means precarious systems. I alluded to this a little bit at the start about this little bit of roller coaster that Canadians were on about sort of their level of trust in institutions. And I think where it's really left us is during the pandemic, there was a real attachment to what was known well and what had operated for a long time as a sort of anchor to hold us as we were being thrown around in a bit of a global pandemic. But now there's been a little bit more of a shift in that. So we asked another statement. The systems and institutions we rely on feel less stable than they used to, making it harder to build a secure life. 86% of Canadians, which is another large percentage, agree with this statement. And so I think the sort of takeaway for the cooperative movement here is that Canadians are becoming more wary of systems and institutions that existed, but also a lot more open to other types of sort of models and structures that they might not have been previously involved in. Um, it's important to sort of look to understand and they're looking to understand sort of why the realities of precarity have endured for some time. Cost of living has been an issue for a number of years now. And Canadians are sort of looking for answers, both in the models of sort of who's responsible, but also who can sort of bring them up from this experience that they don't want to be experiencing anymore. In some of the other pieces of work in this research, we found that Canadians believe co-ops are more resilient, they're better at weathering economic shocks, and they're also built for the long term. All three of those, to me, scream stability in a world where Canadians are really looking for that anchor to bring them along. So I'll pass it over to Tim here to share a little bit more about the cooperative role on this piece.
Mais merci, Oksana. Si je suis bien ces données du point de vue des coopératives d'habitation, voici que je dirais. Euh, Évidemment, les coopératives d'habitation, ça marche vraiment bien dans ce contexte. Et ça, c'est encore plus vu dans les dernières années avec la crise du logement qui s'est aggravée. Environ de 250 000 personnes au Canada vivent dans une coop d'habitation dans toutes les provinces et tous les territoires. Comme je le disais au début du webinaire, plus la crise du logement s'intensifie, plus les gens s'intéressent au modèle des coops. Autant des citoyens que les organismes et les gouvernements. Euh, et pendant que les locataires vivent de plus en plus d'insécurité avec les rénovations, les hausses de loyers abusives, les démolations des meubles et d'autres pratiques liées à la financiarisation de logements, les coops elles offrent des logements stables et des communautés solides. Il y a très peu de logements libres et comparé au roulement beaucoup de plus élevé dans le marché locatif privé. Une étude faite en 2022 a montré que dans des coops sans subventionner, les loyers étaient de 500 dollars par mois moins chers que les logements similaires dans le même quartier. Et si on refaisait l'étude d'aujourd'hui, l'écart serait sûrement encore plus grand. En plus, la plupart de ces coops existent depuis 30, 40 ans en plus. Euh, Tout ça montre clairement que les coops d'habitation sont solides et durables. Elles sont engagées à offrir du bon logement dans des milieux de vie inclusifs pour le long terme. Ici, pas de flip et les flips d'immobilier, c'est juste une vraie engagement envers la communauté, pour la communauté. En bref, la stabilité que ces gens cherchent, elle existe déjà dans les coopératives d'habitation. Maintenant, il faut simplement construire davantage pour répondre à la demande, pour continuer d'augmenter le stock de coop d'habitation. Euh, really what this data story is telling us is we really don't need to be high-minded about what we're delivering as cooperatives. We just need to be very practical about what we deliver. The advantages of co-ops, whether it's a housing co-op, a food co-op, any co-op in the ecosystem, it responds to practical needs, and then we also leave room to do more than that to allow space for meaning across Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But today, certainly, Canadiens are geared towards the more practical needs, and co-ops, such as housing co-ops, offer some response to that.
Thanks, Tim. We'll move on to the third key finding of the data for today, which is that like in 2019 and even stronger in this new reality, people in Canada want more cooperatives, and they also want in on the movement and the opportunity to be part of the cooperative movement. Looking at the next slide, we part of this research was really wanting to look at sort of the reality that Canadians were living in and where the cooperative sector was at, and really targeted asking questions to see if Canadians could understand the links between the movement and what they were seeking to. Sort of Tim's point about Canadians are looking for those basic needs. Do they think that cooperatives can deliver on them? And so if we go to the next slide here, over and over again in the way in which we were sort of framing this current Canada problem, cooperatives as a solution, Canadians over and over again agreed that cooperatives offer solutions for a variety of different sort of angles of tackling this problem. 83% agreed that cooperatives help make communities more stable during economic ups and downs. That's everything from cooperative goods and services to, I think, and even especially cooperative housing. 83% also agree that cooperatives are more likely to survive tough times because their members have a stake in their success. When Canadians feel that 89% feel that we are always going to be living in a precarious world, they are going to be looking for solutions that provide that stability and things that will be surviving for a long, long time because they don't think that everything will. And so when 83% of Canadians sort of put their trust in cooperatives as being that long-term stable piece of their community and their lives, that's huge. That's huge. Almost as many believe that cooperatives are part of the solution to Canada's biggest challenges, really linking not only cooperatives as bringing that sort of institutional stability, but really from an issues lens as well, whether that be things like housing, groceries, all sorts of avenues. Canadians really believe that cooperatives are part of the solution and not the cause of these things, which I think is really important given that earlier finding where we saw that many Canadians were sort of skeptical of the systems in place and what they've done to cause things today. Instead, the lens that Canadians see cooperatives through is a lot more positive and as a solution to a number of the challenges that they're facing today. Finally, we haven't touched on it that much during today, and not a lot of Canadians' minds are sort of on the sort of the what many are sort of calling the next frontier of change with technology and things like AI. But a number of Canadians, 71%, also agree that cooperatives are better equipped to adapt to change and new technologies than other kind of businesses. In a world where things are precarious, things can slip easily, being able to pivot and support those around you is of utmost importance. And that's a large majority of Canadians who put their trust in the cooperative movement to be able to make those pivots when needed for Canadians and for members. Looking at the next slide, just really reiterating the importance of framing and sort of how to pitch this sort of story and piece to Canadians that they already so much agree with. We asked Canadians to look at different aspects of co-ops and get them to say if this piece sort of appeals to them or not. And what we found is that Canadians find a number of cooperative attributes quite appealing, but really driving home that focus on building community. 89% say it's appealing that the business provides education to their customers, managers, and employees to help grow the business. 88% are drawn to sustainable development. 86% are sort of drawn to the ability that anyone can be involved in the business. And still high, but sort of lower down on the list is that depending on the type of enterprise, the business is always controlled by employees, customers, and producers, no matter what. Again, that piece of control sort of aspect really coming through in what Canadians are looking for. And just as a sort of aside, some of the other pieces of this conversation that we looked at in terms of really how to frame the cooperative movement. When we frame cooperatives as good for Canada, we say good support, moderate support. But when we frame cooperatives as an avenue and an option to strengthen communities, that community's language gets even higher support. And so when we're looking to communicate the value of cooperatives for Canadians are really latching on to sort of that piece about strengthening their communities and really that sort of local sort of ability to bring their community up rather than just Canada. One sort of final piece on the framing, if you can move to the next slide. I know we've alluded a lot to this pyramid of a hierarchy of needs, but just as a sort of reminder of the importance of really meeting Canadians where they're at. This applies to anyone who is trying to talk to Canadians in any sort of way. Like anything else, framing the benefits of cooperatives must meet Canadians where they're at. The idea of cooperatives is providing sort of self-actualization needs is appealing to Canadians, for sure. We tested that. But what they're really looking for, and which is also what we tested, was what they need right now and what they're seeking out today. And that happens to be those two sort of lower rungs. Being able to provide brief, grounded examples of exactly how the cooperative movement brings them those needs, because we know that it does, and we know that Canadians believe it does, but reminding Canadians time and time again about the stability, the predictability, the sense of ownership and belonging, all these things that Canadians are looking for can be found right in the cooperative movement. The data is already showing us that Canadians are into this messaging. They understand the value of cooperatives. They see those connections. And what we're seeing is just the surge and a huge interest in the cooperative movement. If you can move to the next slide, we find an overwhelming number of Canadians are either involved or interested in a cooperative. 7 in 10 Canadians, to be exact. About a third of Canadians are currently a member of a cooperative business, which has grown since 2019. But even more important, we wanted to explore interest in joining a cooperative if folks were not yet doing so. Among those who aren't members, 65% were interested in joining a co-op, which means altogether 70% of Canadians sit within the cooperative universe. I work with a lot of different sectors and organizations, but to have a universe of 7 in 10 Canadians is quite remarkable to be able to secure just that great of a size, and then also across demographics. Cooperatives are not just appealing to older folks in the prairies, for example, or younger Canadians in Atlantic Canada. They're appealing to all of these different groups. And I think that's something that's really special about the movement, is just how much the messaging of the movement is really universally appealing and is really aligned with what Canadians are looking for today. So I'll pass things back over to Mike and Tim to wrap up the findings here.
Thanks so much, Oksana. And we can go to the next slide. And thanks so much to our colleagues at Abacus for helping us study these important questions and receive a good data set that helps us to tell a better story about housing cooperatives and cooperatives more broadly. I really think these data help us tell the cooperative story. Especially if we can pair it with anecdotes, stories, personal experiences, and responding very practically to the needs and aspirations of members of our communities. One of the anecdotes that I often share is around just a few years ago when 24 new units of co-op housing were set to open in Toronto. over 6,000 people flooded into to the lottery the first week that the lottery opened for these homes. That lottery portal had to be shut down, and obviously it's just one story that shows the strong demand for cooperative responses to everyday community needs. This shows us how hungry Canadians are for something else, something that isn't caught up or gearing towards a system that has left so many people insecure without the basics and without a voice in their everyday lives. And in the housing co-op context, there's just so many stories of mutual aid. They're difficult to quantify sometimes, but equally important. They're neighbors checking in on neighbors, community members who know each other because they're members of a cooperative, serving on the same communities, being involved in their communities and the governance of what makes cooperatives special and distinct. We see empty nesters looking after neighbors' kids, building bonds that endure in community. And because of how community is centered in cooperatives, and because this kind of caring is possible when you're not working multiple jobs just to pay an ever-increasing rent to people who are extracting your hard-earned dollars through your rent. So we need, and we have an opportunity to tell the story of what cooperatives offer, no matter what the sector. I'm speaking about housing cooperatives, but there are just as many compelling stories across our movement because it is different, and it is clear to me that it's something that Canadians are looking for. And the data in this story tells us precisely that. And so we have and need an opportunity to tell this story to decision makers at every level, to members of our community who may not know that this model exists. And we have an opportunity to share this model with others, to show not in the hypothetical, but in the very practical about how co-ops can respond to needs and the sense of security and sense of control that's desired by so many Canadians. So let's not hesitate to take every opportunity to tell our story, but not just to tell our story, but to build up and scale up our ability to meaningfully respond to the needs and desires of our neighbors. I'll pass it over to Mike to close us out.
Oui, merci Tim, j'appuie ça. Puis je dois dire que cette dernière section qu'Oksana nous a présentée, c'est surtout ces données que je voulais avoir avec cette étude. 81%, comme elle a dit, 81% des Canadiens qui croient que les coops font partie des solutions pour les plus grands défis auxquels nous sommes confrontés, c'est énorme. Et 34% des Canadiens, le tiers du pays, sont déjà membres d'une coopérative, credit union, caisse, mutuelle, et un autre tiers sont intéressés à se joindre. Ça, c'est 70% de la population du pays qui sont déjà membres ou intéressés. C'est un appui du public extraordinaire et une très grande opportunité pour nous si on peut le saisir. J'ai déjà vu dans le clavardage, question qu'est-ce que CMC puis les associations provinciales vont faire pour ça. Je peux dire que le plan stratégique de CMC est orienté vers la croissance et on veut plus de coop, plus de membres, une plus grande part de l'économie. Mais il faut que cette croissance soit euh, bien ancrée dans l'identité coopérative. Une croissance qui n'est pas enracinée dans cette identité sera fragile et même éphémère. J'ai vu un autre commentaire sur l'habilité, la compétence, la capacité des coopératives de mettre en pratique les valeurs, les principes pour une gouvernance vraiment démocratique. Et ça, il faut le renforcer, c'est sûr. C'est ça qui nous distingue des autres approches et je dirais que ça fait en sorte que ce qu'on fait marche si bien. Alors, pour moi, je retire essentiellement 2 points. Pour les gens qui font la promotion des coops, qui est probablement tout le monde ici, qui devrait être nous tous, mais surtout en matière de communication, ça veut dire qu'on doit positionner les coops comme des solutions pratiques, non seulement en réponse axée sur des valeurs, bien sûr, c'est aussi ça, mais si on peut mettre l'accent sur la stabilité, le contrôle, la confiance, l'accessibilité financière, c'est là où on voit le plus grand intérêt, plus grande majorité des Canadiens, c'est là qu'on va avoir le plus de réponses. Puis, pour la représentation auprès des décideurs politiques, il faut reconnaître que les coopératives répondent aux attentes exprimées par les Canadiens, la stabilité, des prix abordables, la résilience locale. Les coopératives bénéficient d'un énorme soutien, comme Oksana l'a mentionné, plus grand que presque tout enjeu. Et les cadres politiques donc favorables aux coopératives sont susceptibles d'avoir une légitimité long terme et faire une différence réelle pour les Canadiens dans leur communauté. Donc, pour clore, les Canadiens sont clairs ce qu'ils veulent. Les coopératives répondent déjà à ces attentes et c'est à nous maintenant de développer davantage ce qui fonctionne pour mieux répondre à ces besoins et bâtir une économie plus coopérative. Donc, je sais, on a peut-être quelques minutes pour répondre à certaines questions. J'ai apprécié beaucoup l'échange dans le clavardage. Est-ce que c'est Lisa ou Dallas qui va animer la session de questions-réponses?
Yeah, if everyone can hear me, yeah, we're going to move into the Q&A portion now of our presentation. So we'll take some questions from our chat. If you haven't had a chance and you have a question, please type it into the chat box found at the bottom of your screen. So thanks, Mike. You answered one of the questions, which was how CMC will use this information to promote cooperatives. I just wondered if I could pass it over to Tim to answer that same question.
And I have one more thing to add on that actually, is that it can't be just CMC and the provincial associations doing this. Like we're a big cooperative sector and movement, whether it's the big co-ops themselves, all co-ops. Like I think all of us, we need to be aware of and using this information. And the more that we can have some consistency, coherency in our communications, the more it's going to penetrate because we not only need to reach a broad audience, but we need to repeat things, for it to sink in. So I think you'll see, I hope, over the coming months, some coherent messaging coming out of CMC and the provincial associations. We're going to continue talking with our bigger members as well. But the more people who sort of buy in to start using those same messages, I would encourage all of us to be part of that project because it's the number one issue. It's the biggest, it's the most daunting, but there's such a big opportunity there. Sorry, Tim, I jumped in before you got a chance to reply to.
All good and great context offered there, Mike. What these data are telling us at the Co-op Housing Federation of Canada is that the proof of concept around the cooperative model is very solid. There's a significant degree of public support. There's a desire to participate and for Canadians to take a role in membership in cooperatives. That means taking responsibility in order to participate in the benefits of cooperatives. What's a challenge though, and where there's a tension, I think, across the whole movement in Canada, regardless of sector, is how do we scale up to meet the desire of Canadians to participate in the responsibilities and benefits of a cooperative, to enjoy the affordability, the security, and sense of control that is offered by becoming a member of a housing cooperative or a cooperative more writ large. So this feeds into our mission of working to scale up housing cooperatives more rapidly in response to the housing crisis. I would go on, but I know that we're limited with time, and certainly would want to give space for another question if we have time for another question.
Yes, yeah, we have a few questions. This was a comment, not necessarily a question, but I thought I'd like to hear from both Tim and Mike. There was someone that mentioned that decision makers and worldviews don't always match the requirements of everyday workers, consumers, and citizens, and that a paradigm shift in our thinking is needed. And I just wondered if you could comment from your perspectives on policy, like federal government policymakers, and what kind of paradigm shift we might want there to benefit consumers and cooperatives.
Who wants to start? Well, I think certainly the gulf between world leaders and Fortune 500 company CEOs and the needs of everyday community members, there's a pretty big gulf there. Certainly, I would acknowledge that. The beauty of the cooperative model is it enables members to take responsibility and gives a means of organization to realize needs and aspirations. So that's the built-in ability to give voice to the needs of members of cooperatives, to strengthen voice of needs and dreams of communities, is very well reflected in housing cooperatives and in the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada. We have 250,000 people contributing to the mission of CHF Canada to advocate for stronger and more equitable housing solutions. The same can be true and is true for other sectors of the cooperative economy as well.
And I'll very quickly just say, I think the real strength and challenge of our model is that we address both the symptoms, right, the immediate needs that people have, as well as the systems that create that inequality and problems. And it's really hard, I think it's harder to communicate the systemic advantage. Something that came out of this data for me is actually the extent to which people are looking for or recognize the systems aren't working for them. They're looking for alternatives, but it's hard to articulate something abstract like that. So I think there's work to be done, but both with policymakers and at different levels of government, because provinces have I think, even more levers than the federal government to be able to support change in this direction.
Thanks, and I see we're almost at time, but I want to give 30 seconds to Oksana to answer 30 seconds to answer a question. The research talked about awareness by Canadians of co-ops, but is there any indication of their knowledge of co-ops? I guess that's a question about the deeper understanding of co-ops. Can someone unmute Oksana, please?
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so we did ask a little bit about self-reported familiarity with co-ops. And the good news is that 80% of Canadians have heard of a co-op before, which I think is a very large number. I think that the challenge has sort of been, I'm looking at the chat and conversation as well, as sort of how do you communicate those specific differences? When we ask Canadians what they think of when they think of cooperatives, they tend to think less structural things and more so the value adds of the cooperative movement. So like community, collaboration, democratic. And so I think in educating Canadians about the difference and sort of appealing to them through the model, it's also about tapping into those pieces because that's really what's going to draw folks in is just how well the cooperative movement, the technical pieces meet the sort of broad overarching needs of Canadians.
Thank you. Well, we're at time. I want to thank all of the participants for attending the webinar. I want to thank our speakers, Mike Toy, Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada, Tim Ross, Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada, and Oksana Kishuk, Abacus Data. We'll make a recording available to you shortly. For the questions we didn't get to, and we apologize for running out of time, feel free to email us at the emails you see on your screen so that we can address any remaining questions. So thank you again for being with us today, and have a good rest of your day. Thanks, everyone. Good job. Thanks for being here.